The agenda is a meeting with Mr. Bryan regarding Article 2 on the September 26th special town meeting warrant. Mr. Moss, good evening.
Good evening. How's everybody doing? Good. Good. Just
Right.
that.
I can keep an eye on for you.
Okay, good. Sure, I'm under 10 minutes. I can talk for a long time. So thank you for having me tonight. I wanted to just get in front of the board before we got to town meeting, before you were, making your recommendations, just to answer questions, but also just give a quick overview of some of the questions I've been hearing the last couple of weeks, so I can kind of address those. So number one was, I've seen a lot of questions like, what's my motivation? We just did this last year. Why are we bringing it back? What do I have to gain for bringing it back? But, just to address that quickly, I'm really just volunteering my time and really just looking out for in my view, the health of the community, and trying to protect all members of the community, including those that are most vulnerable to certain substances like fluoride, such as, kidney patients, diabetes patients, seniors, babies have been identified as susceptible subpopulations. So I'm really just trying to look at, helping the community. So then that's kind of my motivation. But number two would be, a question I've heard is, why are we doing this again? What's new? The fluoride's been around for 70 years. What's new about it? And really the first thing that caught my eye was the new water treatment plant. So this is timely with the new special town meeting. I'm in full support of the new water treatment plant. I think it's great. I want to praise Mr. Morgado, Mr. Tedeschi, and the board for the great job they did looking to build this new water treatment plant. And when I started to dig further into it, I did notice that some of the drivers for building the new water treatment plant was to remove the manganese. When I started looking at manganese and trying to understand it, I did notice that a lot of the references, whether it be a news story out there or actually just memos that were going around, they were referencing the neurological and behavioral effects, especially to young children, that manganese levels can bring. I think those are the stakeholders involved that I mentioned were looking to try to get ahead of the game and do the right thing and bring those levels down as much as they can and do this treatment to build this treatment plant so that we could lower those levels and address those concerns. So I'm interested in these types of things, so I dug a little deeper and looked at the town website, and it had a reference to the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection website's manganese information section. So when I went there, they had a reference to a comprehensive list of research that's relative to children's health and a substance such as manganese. So the Department of Environmental Protection's Office of Research and Standards in 2014 referenced a Lancelet research paper that said, they had identified developmental neurotoxins such as lead, arsenic, mercury, and in 2006, epidemiological studies have documented 6 additional developmental neurotoxins: manganese, fluoride, etc. So when I looked at that and said, we have been talking a lot about, where's the studies, where's the links. I wanted to be able to, something I came upon, and it's right there. It's the Mass Department of Environmental Protection's Office of Research presenting. And the pages go on, and a lot of these sound very similar to the things when we talk about. But this showing the direct link, the direct categorization of manganese with fluoride is what really made me look twice at this and say, the conversation around manganese is looking similar to what we were bringing up a year before. Number two, what else did I see? One of the things was that not all the people can drink the water in town. I presented that last time, but a month after I presented, the American Thyroid Association came out with its journal and mentioned the latest research. They're trying to get the research out there as fast as they get to the doctors, and they gave that research out, and it was saying that they've done studies where they've looked at communities with fluoridation and communities that are non-fluoridated and compared them and seen a higher rate of hypothyroidism in there. So again, something I saw that was referenced by an established entity. And then thirdly, the Cochrane collaboration, which is the gold standard for doing meta-analysis on existing studies that are out there. came out a month after the presentation and said, we've looked at the studies, you know, and I know we've been saying that on the pro-fluoridation side, there's thousands of studies, but when it looked at and actually did the meta-analysis, it said most of these studies are before 1975. There's only a couple that are after 1975. And it, you know, started to question, you know, we see a reduction in tooth decay for children, but not for adults. We can't find proof that it's for adults. So you're starting to look at, you know, subpopulations versus the whole populations. And it's pretty much, again, another resource that's not just from an anti-fluoridation website. The Cochrane collaboration is a gold standard in these research studies. So just want to take the first half to say that's what, seeing these come out, resurfaced the question. But when I looked at it further, I really thought that last time I learned a lesson that, I was asking the wrong question. You know, let's oppose fluoridation. Let's get fluoride out of the water. And really the conversation, like I just mentioned, and the context is important, is fluoride good, is fluoride not? So many people in this room believe fluoride's good. Many people in this room believe fluoride's not. And that question has been around for 70 years. And what we really want to do is take a look at that and say, are we asking the right question? I don't believe so. I think the right question is, who makes the decision? Not whether it's good or bad, but who gets to make that, any decision on putting a substance into your body. If you look at the ADA patient rights section, they say any patient has the right to accept or refuse any treatment offered, any preventative treatment that's out there. So, and the American Medical Association, also in its medical ethics site, is saying that as well. You have this conversation about pros and cons, which is that discussion, and then, but essentially it's the patient that makes the decision. So what I did was I looked and I saw, well, why isn't the federal government requiring this? And when you look at it, the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act actually has one line in it that says the federal government cannot require the addition of any substance for preventative health care measures. So I said, oh, well, that's great. I think all of us maybe, or let's say a portion of us, would be happy to know that a federal government can't require a substance, right? We don't want maybe, you know, coming from the federal government, you must drink this. So I looked at the state laws. It's too much to get into now, but the state laws also don't require it, but recommend it. So I'm not saying that these bodies don't, but so do doctors recommend things, but can't force them. So if you look at the state, recommend, not require. If you look at the town, they are able to require through the Board of Health in order to raise the level. And if you look at your own doctor, they're not allowed to require you to take any substance for preventative health care. Essentially, it's the individual that makes that decision. However, in this case of fluoridation, it's the town making that decision. So that's where I really wanted to bring this back and say, let's talk about pros and cons, but in the end, the question is not for this specific bylaw. We should talk about whether it's good or bad, but in the end, it's who gets to make that decision, and actually who has the right to make that decision. So this bylaw is specifically written to mimic the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act line. It's really what the intent is to say. The federal government says we're not going to require you to put it in. State governments, we're not going to require you to put it in. Doctors, we're not going to require you. All this does is put in a bylaw, a town law, that's equivalent to what the federal government put in that says we're also not going to allow any board officer or commissioner to require a substance for preventative health care purposes. And a good distinction to know is chlorine. Chlorine is for the treatment, right? We're building a water treatment plant, and what's so important about that is we're spending $14.5 million for a water treatment plant. We're trying to take the manganese out. We're trying to put the, treat it with chlorine to make sure it's safe. Fluoride is the only thing where it's actually trying to, you're putting it in, not for anything to do with actually treating the water, is to treat the people. And that is what in the Federal Drinking Water Act, it actually has that exception. You can't treat the people, but you can treat the water. So it gives examples about why it's not a good idea and why to put substances in the water. One, it violates informed consent. You have no control over who gets it. Everybody gets it, even the subpopulations I mentioned. No control of dose. So even though we have 0.7, you can control that very well. Like the water department can control that perfectly. However, dose is how much you consume over a day. So if you drink 5 glasses, I drink 1, your dose is 5 times higher than me. No control of dosage. You have infants that are dosages amount per day per your weight. So an infant in the whole community is getting the highest dosage of anybody. 0 to 6 months is getting the highest dose. A bottle-fed baby is getting the highest dosage of anybody. And everybody has a different responses to the same dose. So in the end, I just wanted to bring this forward, give some motivations, give some reasons why I brought it, but really just to bring it back to that question on who has the right to make the decision of what we put in our bodies. Is it an individual or is it a town? Thank you. And I hope, that's 10 minutes, so I hope people have questions. Feel free to ask. I'm here to ask any questions you have that I didn't cover.
Anybody have any questions, comments?
I do have a question,
Fitzgerald?
I guess more of a comment than a question.
Sure.
The way you wrote that, Mr. Moss, and I read it over first, I wasn't quite sure, and I've talked to a few people. If you were saying that there was the legal question of informed consent, and therefore, in a sense that if I didn't know anything else, that town meeting had no right, essentially, to come and make the ruling on this. That's part one. Mm-hmm. But what confused me about reading the rest of this was it went into the physiological effects, of potential effects of fluoride in water. And so I'm not quite sure exactly. It seems to be a dual purpose of your petition to look at this from two different levels. And I'm not clear in my own mind that there is anything wrong with the town meeting agreeing to use fluoride in the water as it's done for, I know, since the early 50s, and keep that going. So I want to make clear, are you more concerned about some physiological effects from reading you've done, or are you saying this is a legal issue which should really be brought to a different, a state-level conversation as opposed to a local-level conversation?
That's a good question. So, of course, there's always the drivers of people can't drink. Some people cannot drink the water in the community, so that is a driver, or do not want to drink the water in the community. And there are reasons behind that. So the bylaw doesn't actually address fluoride specifically or any. I do have a supplemental packet that I did provide that addresses, you're right, the reasons why one may not want to take fluoride or to drink fluoride. But I did separate that out, learning my lesson from last time, is that it really comes down to who gets to make that decision. So you're right, that's just context. Fluoride, good or bad, context. It's hard for me not to talk about whether it's good or bad. But, you know, I put that aside, you know, at the end of the day, because it is a good conversation to have, because it's a good motivator. Why would somebody, it's so good, why would somebody, nobody in the community would challenge that, right, that I want to put it in the water. But there are people that can't drink it. You know, I have neighbors that can't drink it. 1 in 8 women have thyroid issues, and, you know, when I mentioned the American Thyroid Association research, so there's a lot of people that are concerned. There's a big population that are concerned. So with that concern, it really boils down to any substance that you're given. Can you think of any other, I guess I would say, can you think of any other substance where, for preventative health care measures, where you, as an individual, do not get to make the decision?
I'm not sure. I'm just trying to get an answer from you straight, though.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
you haven't really answered my question. Are you saying this is a legal issue, or are you saying this is a medical matter?
So,
and you seem to be saying both, and it's kind of confusing my thought process as to where this is exactly coming from.
So you're right. So I am talking about the physiological effects of fluoride.
Okay.
To give context, so I'll put that aside because maybe that does confuse the issue, good or bad. And I think both sides will bring that up, good reasons, bad reasons. Put that aside. It has nothing to do with this bylaw. It's motivator to drive why we would actually create this bylaw. When we talk about informed consent, it's one of the most foundational rights. Even the UN, you know, states in its charters that a person has a right to accept or refuse the recommended treatment for either preventing or treating disease. So when you look at like fundamental human right, it's I get to decide what substance I put in my body. So that is the bylaw, you know, pretty much to the T. Now, as whether it's a legal question, instead of saying, you know, I'm going to come sue the town because the state allows the town, the state gives guidance to say, you know what, we're not going to require you, but hey, if you want to do it, town, your Board of Health is the one that's got the order. Your 3 board members are the ones that decide for the $35,000. So there's guidance around that. So I don't think it's as much as like suing the town. I wouldn't want to do that. I don't think it's a good idea. I think this is trying to say, I believe there's a loophole. I believe that the fluoride was, the idea of adding a substance, so if I take fluoride aside, the idea of adding a substance was 1950s, you know, what in the 1950s they thought was a good idea. Let's take a substance and put it into the drinking water and do it this way. But in 2016, we have all sorts of sources of these substances that we could have. So, but it got in there before the Massachusetts laws ever were enacted. So somebody stands up and says, put fluoride in the community, or put a substance in the water for the community. There was no law at the time, so the laws tried to catch up in Massachusetts, and what they did was just qualify it and say, no, you can't just stand up in town meeting and say, put it in the water. The Board of Health has that control, so that just kind of clarified it. So, but in the end, it becomes, I see a loophole there. The federal government doesn't require it, the state doesn't require it, your doctor can't require it, only the individual can make that decision for themselves, but somehow the town from 1950 on was able to make that decision for us. So if we close that loophole, really, I think that if I take a step back, I say this conversation has been going on for 70 years. I think it's time we take it off the table. Is it really, should we be having discussions about what substances to put in the public drinking water? You know, if we, no matter what the substance is, it's just not the right way to do it. So if we model the federal government, we'd say, it doesn't matter if it's 3 Board of Health members, it doesn't matter if it's 240 town meeting members, it doesn't matter if we have a ballot question and have 4,000 people voted up or down. Those people shouldn't any of those people shouldn't be making that decision for me. Only me as an individual should be able to make that decision. That right of informed consent comes back to me if the town closes that loophole and puts in a bylaw that exactly states what the federal government states and says, no board will be able to require that a substance be added to the water for preventative health care measures. Then we're done, the conversation's over, we get money back, we don't have to spend money on this or have conversations around. We look at alternatives and like the other towns around and do it a different way. That's.
I'm good, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. King?
I just have a couple of questions, Brian.
Sure.
Town meeting already has this power because they could choose to cut from the budget the expenditure for fluoride. So it already exists. Motion could be made next spring to cut the fluoride budget, and therefore it's not in. Why did you choose to break this, Section 1 and Section 2? And you just stated, I think, unless I misheard you, that fluoride's the issue. So why not just call it out as fluoride if you're interested in sticking with Section 2? For as I've said, for 70-some-odd years, I think it is now, somehow from the 50s. No, it can't be 70, John, is it?
63.
53, thank you.
Well, it's 63.
If there's been debate going on this year, town meetings approved it for the last umpteen annual budgets. But if you could, can you walk me through what, and I don't want to get down into the nitty-gritty, but what's with the Section 1? Because
okay.
I understand your issue on informed consent, fine.
Yep.
And I respect that, but no one has control over who gets it. It's delivered indiscriminately. I would argue that the water plant or anything we do in town is not done in an indiscriminate fashion. It's done within a certain regime to ensure there isn't a spike of material. So, you know, where does that language get you? It seems to me that, as someone once said, we have a solution in search of a problem. Mm-hmm. Town meeting didn't want this. Town meeting could end the funding at any annual town meeting, and we'd be out of this business. So where are we going, in all honesty? With all due respect, I mean, the proposal got virtually very little support last time. We've got some issues before us. So why craft it this way, and to what end?
Okay, let me try to not be long-winded. I'll try to do it quicker. So there's 2 sections serve a purpose. When I look at the current bylaws, so I read the current bylaws and I said to myself, a lot of the ones that are in there have a intent section, and then they actually have the procedure. So if I just said Section 2 procedure, no one shall add a substance, then people would say, well, Brian, you're just pulling this out of your pocket, and you know, why does it even make sense to put this in there? So really, Section 1 was to try to give the intent to say, you know what, this conversation that I'm having today is one that was had back in the 70s by U.S. Congress to say, they've already decided this from at a federal level, saying, no, the federal government should not be able to require the addition of this substance. So I said, well, this has already happened at this level. Why not just copy it?
With respect, that could change. That could change.
Right. And it hasn't changed since the 70s, so, you know.
This hasn't changed since the 50s. I'm not trying to be a wise guy, but, you know, a variety of these things could change. But to me, at the end of the day, it's very simple. You don't want fluoride? Cut the budget, no fluoride. Boom. I don't know why we need another bylaw. I don't know why we need to take time of town meeting when we're having a difficult, enough time getting people to run for town meeting and come to the meetings. Just make the budget on the floor, make the motion, boom. Very simple. But go ahead.
Yeah. So that is another option is to, but again, I did feel that I want to, I guess I want to respect people's opinions that they are pro-fluoridation. So I think if everybody in this room was pro-fluoridation, I would say hats, I want to respect that. That's their choice. They can have take fluoride and, and I respect that. And I think what this is saying is that if we get into the debates of pro and con, then that will just continue on. And this is trying to go back and say, you know what, I'm not reinventing the wheel. The federal government already has a bylaw. All we need is a town law that mimics it, and it's off the table. From a point that I think, at least from what I've heard from people, is they'll say, Bryan, I'm pro-fluoride. I want fluoride. So never going to convince them to say, cut the fluoride budget. But at the end of the conversation, they do say, I do believe that a person should have the choice whether to get fluoride. There's plenty of options to get fluoride out there today that weren't there in the 50s when they first put this in. So, I felt this time that if I took another route like oppose fluoridation or cut the budget for fluoridation, it becomes, well, fluoride's good for you, so we're going to put it in the water. And this really says whether or not somebody thinks fluoride's good for you, that's the individual's choice. Not if once you put it in the water supply, you have to drink it.
But isn't it your point that fluoride should be out of the water?
Fluoride should be out of the water. So this
Why
says,
not just cut to the chase and say what you say you mean? And just seek to cut the budget. But I don't want to believe
no, it's actually a great point. And what I tried to do is not use my own language. This language is copy and paste from the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act, and that exact line does not single out fluoride, even though fluoride is the only substance. So this would prevent if somebody says, well, we have a lot of high cholesterol in town, so let's add Lipitor because we want to because heart is good for your health and your overall health, and let's get this substance the most cost-effective way to get it there. So this would prevent that in the future.
Is that a rational example, though? Flooding the system with Lipitor?
That's as rational as flooding it with fluoride, in my opinion.
Really?
Well, I think the difference might be that fluoride in a lot of communities is naturally occurring. And this whole thing about fluoride started back over 100 years ago. And it started out trying to find out why people in the Denver area had stained teeth but no cavities. That's how it all started out. And after 20 years of research, it was discovered that it was fluoride in the water. There happened to be very high concentrations of fluoride in the water. And there was more study done that said, well, they went around the country and they found places that had fluoride and higher concentrations of fluoride in the water, same thing. And so after more research, they came up with levels that they felt were appropriate. So fluoride is not like putting Lipitor in the water. Fluoride is in a lot of the water. It's already there in a lot of places. So I don't think you can make the same. I don't think you can make the same argument. I think that the intent of that guideline by the federal government was push it down to the local level. And I think the state was push it down to the local level.
Yep.
Which is, again, a state right or whatever. The state said, let the towns decide if they want it or not. This town decided they wanted it. And, a couple of weeks, they might decide not to. But there are a lot of communities that have it, that add it in the state, and it's almost 50-50. So it's not like people don't have options. What are you going to do? So what happens if town meeting votes again overwhelmingly that they want to leave fluoride in the water? Then what? What happens then?
Well, I guess, one of the things that we need to think about should this be a discussion for the town, right? I think this is an individual right that somebody should be deciding if
Right,
fluoride's good for me in my situation, if I'm, you know, how much I should have and whether that's gonna hurt or harm me at the certain rates. If town meeting says, you know, we don't, informed consent for an individual doesn't apply in this case, you know, something like that, or, but, you know, it decides that and says, you know, there's different motivations, doesn't pass. The problem with, what I see the problem is that new research constantly comes out. Like right now, I don't know if anybody's aware of this, but the EPA is they have 6-year reviews, so they look at contaminants. So fluoride is considered a contaminant. Every 6 years, they decide the list of contaminants, and albeit there's not many contaminants, right? Fluoride is in the list of, like, it was one of the first 22 in the Safe Drinking Water Act. There's thousands of chemicals. Fluoride is one that they actually have a primary regulation to cap it at 4 parts per million because of the adverse health effects that can be with it. So it's something that, like the EPA doesn't say fluoride is good and we're never going to look at it again. Every 6 years they say, let's take that list again, look at it. Well, back in 2006, the National Academy of Sciences, the EPA requested from the National Academy of Sciences National Research Council to go take a look at fluoride and its effects. And when they did, they came back and said, we don't believe 4 parts per million is low enough to prevent from the adverse health effects of fluoride. So you need to go back and take a look at this EPA because and we had it at 1 part per million. The EPA has been doing this. I think it's the third 6-year study is in process right now. They chose fluoride because of NRC's recommendation to say 4 parts per million is too high upper limit. It's going to be lower. We don't know what that number will be.
That's true, but 4 parts per million was not what Shrewsbury was at.
It's at 1, right?
And now it's at 0.7.
And the reason it's at 0.7 was because when it was 1 parts per million, when that decision was made in the 50s, 1 part per million, what they ended up doing was they didn't have fluoride toothpaste back then. They didn't have fluoride mouthwashes. They didn't have fluoride supplements. They didn't have fluoride treatments at the doctor. So now you have all of these sources of fluoride, everybody fluoridating the water. What they found was that adolescents, 12 to 15 years old, 41% had dental fluorosis. So if 41% had dental fluorosis, they're being overexposed to fluoride during their young developmental ages, which I remember I mentioned the link on the Mass DEP site of developmental neurotoxin. They're being overexposed to it. So the reason they said, you know what, people are drinking about the same amount of water, and we have all this extra sources of fluoride, so we're going to reduce the concentration by 30%. That happened a month before town meeting. So what that effectively said, or my interpretation of it, was we've been overexposing you by 30% all these years. So, I mean, there's different takes on that. That would be.
I could read it differently.
Could read it differently.
You know what? Now that the technology has come along and science has come along, we don't need to put as much in the water because you're getting it from someplace else. Not that you're being overexposed. You don't need to put that much in. So, anyways, we could debate this all night, but.
Yep.
Ms. Miller?
Yeah, okay, so I've been listening closely. Trying to sort of pull it all together here. And one of the things you just said, it's interesting because, you know, you're citing the federal government standard, which is saying they won't put anything in the water. We have all these studies. I see the preponderance of the evidence and the studies that I believe are credible still support fluoride in the water. The federal government is doing studies, yet they've not come out and said, is bad, take it out of the water. Mm-hmm. They've said modify it. I believe there's still some benefit. I think I agree with the comment that was made earlier that I believe that federal government clause is in there to put the right of decision at the local level, which is where I believe it ought to be. I think we have 63 years of experience here in Shrewsbury, specific. I think that while there are some studies that are cited, most of those are not U.S. studies. They're not based on, again, a large enough segment of the population for me to overturn what has been, by all accounts, a success story. And so what you're asking us to do is to remove something that, in your own words, most people are for here in Shrewsbury. They believe it's a benefit. They have benefited. I have to believe that I know thousands, if not over 63 years, hundreds of thousands of people believe they have benefited from this substance. I believe there is informed consent. People know it's in the water. So if people do have concerns, they certainly have the option to not drink the water, to filter the water, to use bottled water. I know that's not, something maybe some people want to hear, but that's certainly, it's not that people are not informed. They are informed that there is a naturally occurring mineral in the water. And so I just don't see a case being made yet. And I do think the motivation is to remove fluoride from the water. And you just, you are, searching for some method to do that because you've determined it is not good, where again, I think a majority of the people of Shrewsbury still believe there is a positive impact. And so and regarding spending the dollars, I agree with Mr. Kane. I think town meeting at any point could decide to not spend it. I believe we will, when we build a new treatment plant, we will have to spend the money and build in the ability to have fluoride in the water, because this question, if you decide tomorrow the town meeting decides tomorrow to remove it, next town meeting in a year could decide to put it back in. Right. So it really doesn't save us money from that perspective. So I don't think it's a saving dollars argument here. I think it does come back to what is, is there motivation? Is there, to me, is there a majority of evidence that says it should be removed, and is that something the majority of the community wants?
Jeff Holland, town engineer. For the record, I am fluoride neutral. I don't vote at town meetings, so therefore I will stay out of that discussion. But as the town engineer, I am concerned with the language of the article, mainly section 2. The article basically says that no committee or officer or town member can put in the water something that's unrelated to health or health-related issues. My concern is that could be interpreted, unless you specifically say fluoride, that could be interpreted to be any chemical that's placed in the water, or could be considered, because you have pH control, you have corrosion control, you have other things that chemicals that get added to the water. But the way the bylaw is written, that's not necessarily for
Oh, yeah, right there.
unrelated to contamination of drinking water. pH control is not unrelated to contamination, so therefore I'm concerned that it could be interpreted that pH control or corrosion control, which adds to the removal of the manganese and other contaminants, but it's not necessarily a health-related issue. So my concern is that may be considered or construed in the future of being not allowed. And the water superintendent should have the ability at any time to change a chemical that gets put into the water system for corrosion control, for manganese removal, etc., as your water chemistry changes, as your source changes in the future. Your source may not necessarily always be wells. It may end up being surface water from some other entity. If you look at water suppliers from all around the area, they all have different pHs. They all have different corrosion control methods. They all have chlorination methods that are different. And each one will add a different chemical that the water superintendent or the Board of Water Commissioners should have the ability to alter or change, which has different effects. Without spelling out exactly fluoride, you could, for instance, sodium hypochlorite, which is a pH has a pH control, that could be construed as being contaminant, as in some places which have naturally occurring high sodium, sodium hypochlorite is not allowed because of the high sodium already in the water. This comes out, but the water superintendent comes out and says, that's the only thing I can use for that particular control, then that's what he has to communicate. This is almost saying that or it could be construed that he could not. And there are others. There's other types of chemicals that is added now for different things. For instance, Northborough, their pH is 9.5. Ours is between 7 and 7.5. That's a huge difference in chemistry. Their water is surface water. Ours is well water. If someday we have to go to surface water, we may have to treat with a ferric chloride. We may have to treat with a powdered activated carbon. We may have to, all different types of chemicals that we may have to add to get some of the other contaminants out of the water, which aren't necessarily related to the contamination of drinking water. Removing a manganese right now is a secondary contaminant. It's not a primary contaminant. But it's a color issue, it's a odor issue, it's a smell. It's that, it looks bad, but it's actually safe to drink. It just looks bad. So to remove it, it's not a contamination of the ground, of the drinking water, it's just a control it because you want to make it look good. And so there's other things that get added. If you had surface water, you could add ferric chloride to coagulate the water, the particles that are in the water, to get out the odor, to get out the smell, to get out some of the other things that are in the water that are naturally occurring. For the record, fluoride is naturally occurring already in our water system from our wells. Very low concentration, but it's already in there. And so I'm just concerned the way the language is written on Section 2 procedure. I just think it goes too far. I think it may, at some point, hurt the water superintendent or the water commissioners.
Thank you for that information. I think we're going to stop now.
Do you mind if I just 30 seconds address that? Because I want to make sure that it's known that that wasn't the, I want to just assure that that definitely wasn't the intent. It was copied, it was copied from the federal one, and I think this was, all those are for treatment of water, not treatment of people, but if it would be, if it's something I can amend in the intent to say, and spell that out, that would help, in the bylaw, if it would help, then I can do that, but.
We really, tonight, wanted to hear what you had to say, hear the concerns of the board. Thursday night, this Thursday, no, in 2 weeks, a week from Thursday, the Finance Committee is going to have a hearing, and I think if you have those concerns, Mr. Howland, you should bring them up the air, and I know you're going to make our presentation, so our 15 minutes went about a half an hour, Brian, so.
I did make the 10.
We got a lot. No, I know, but I wanted you to make 10. I didn't think the discussion would go on this long, but, well, thank you for the information.
Yeah.
I guess we'll see you again. I'm sure we're going to hear at the Finance Committee your proposals and probably hear from some other people, and we'll debate it at town meeting.
Great. Thanks for the opportunity to speak and to hear your thoughtful consideration and input. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay.